honored to have with us today Captain J. Charles Plumb, United States Navy Reserve, retired. Plummer has lived what he believes was the American dream. As a farm kid in Kansas, he fantasized about airplanes, but he never thought he'd have the opportunity to pilot one. Well, the United States Navy offered him that opportunity, and after graduating from the United States Naval Academy and then going through Navy flight training, he reported to Miramar Naval Air Station in San Diego, where he flew the first adversary flight in the development of what would be called the Navy Fighter Weapons School, what we currently know and is revered as Top Gun. Okay, the next year, his new unit, Fighter Squadron 114, the Aardvarks, launched to Vietnam aboard the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk to fly the latest and hottest Navy airplane, the F-4 Phantom jet. Charlie flew 74 successful combat missions over North Vietnam and made over 100 carrier landings. On his 75th mission, 5 days prior to the end of his tour, he was shot down over Hanoi, parachuted into enemy hands, was captured, tortured, and spent 2,103 days, nearly 6 years, as a prisoner of war. Following his repatriation, Plummer continued his Navy flying career, where he flew A-4 Skyhawks, A-7 Corsairs, FA-18 Hornets, and then he and the Navy finally came to their senses, and he flew the F-16 Fighting Falcon. His last two commands were aboard the carrier USS Coral Sea and in a fighter air wing in California. He retired from the Navy in 1995 after 31 years of distinguished service. Charlie's decorations include the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, 2 Purple Hearts, and a POW medal. Please refer to your program for his impressive list of the military aircraft he's flown, the aircraft carriers he has served aboard, and all of his decorations. To this day, Captain Plumb continues to fly at every opportunity. He has owned 8 different airplanes, the most treasured of which is a World War II PT-19 open cockpit warbird. Plummer is a member of CAF SoCal here, and he's had his beautiful PT-19 here flying with us, to include being on our ride program. And now, pertinent to us here today, since he retired, Plummer has embarked on a journey to share his story about winning through adversity to audiences, over 5,000 audiences around our country and around the world. To get a feel for how this incredible story began, let's watch a video.
Tower X-ray flight at 3, we're 15 to the northeast for landing.
Now 1 Charlie, 7 November, go.
Roger, auto, 29 forward.
Rifle, maxi at the mark, elevation 30. 7 November, golf, roger. You check your front gun side, I'll check my tank side. 7 November, golf out.
Stay coming that way if you can, bud. So that was my prison cell, the first one I was in, 8 feet long and 8 feet wide. Nothing to do in that prison cell. I had no books to read, no windows to look out, no TV, telephone. Didn't have a pencil or a piece of paper. For 2,103 days, as Lips told you, nearly 6 years, age 24 to age 30, I had 6 birthdays in that prison camp. Over in the corner, my 2-gallon bucket, I call my toilet. 120 degrees sometimes in those prison cells in the summertime. Not a breath of air. I remember an annoying taste of salt in the corners of my mouth, and the sweat and the tears and the blood during that experience of 6 years in a prison camp. Now, I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone here, but there's something to be learned, I think, from every challenge in your life. And there was certainly something to be learned from that 8-foot by 8-foot prison cell that I was in. The first thing you learn in the prison cell is pain. This hurts. This hurts a whole lot. This hurts physically, mentally, emotionally. This flat out hurts. The second thing you learn in a prison cell, and it's 8 feet long and 8 feet wide, is the minutes eventually wear into hours. The hours eventually wear into days, days into weeks, weeks into months, and you acclimate. You get used to this prison cell. In fact, you get so used to this that the last place you want to go is outside the cell, because it's dark and lonely out here. At least you know the devil in the light. Here's what happens. You get this restriction built up, and it's not the 8 feet between the walls. It's 8 inches between your ears. You're in a mental box, and this is going to be a mental game. Ever been in one of those mental boxes? Pretty easy to do in our life and in this economy and with the things that we face, where you can't see the forest for the trees, where you blame everybody else for your problems and feel sorry for yourself, and that's exactly the case that I was in. And so my experience in that prison cell is a lot like your experience and our daily experience of life. Ever been lonely? Ever been afraid? Ever failed at your mission, as I did? Ever had your baseline value system challenged? And so, if in fact I can invite you into my little prison cell, and you can feel the feels and smell the smells of my experience, then I have a couple of questions. Here's the first one. How do you survive this? What kind of stuff do you have in your gut? Where's your grit? What did you bring to the hangar today? What kind of tools do you have in your psychological toolbox you pull out and apply to a problem like this? Question number 2, leaders. And you're all leaders. If you're affecting the people around you, thus you're a leader. What about the guys next door? Leaders. What about those prisoners of war, those fighter pilots in that cell next to yours, guys that are clinging to life with their fingernails and in a world of hurt? They need your help. But they don't trust you. They think you have some kind of hidden agenda. How do you get through to them? Well, I was going stir crazy. I was right on the edge. I decided, Charlie, if you're going to survive this, you're going to have to come up with something to do, make a little game to play. I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll make a little deck of cards, and I did. I constructed a little deck of playing cards about the size of postage stamps. I tore these cards from 52 little strips of toilet paper. And I can tell you this with authority. The third thing you learn in a prison cell is toilet paper is stuff to shuffle. You don't lick your fingers very much shuffling toilet paper. Okay, before we get back into the challenge, I want to just thank you for coming this morning, facing the wind. It's an interesting day to fly in wind like this, but a lot of us have been there. And to be back at the CAF, as Lips told you, I'm a member here and had my PT-19 Fairchild right in this hangar for a lot of years. And we flew that thing around the country to air shows, and flew a lot of young people in that airplane. A great little airplane. I found 4 of these airplanes in a barn out in 1973 when I first came home from Vietnam. And they were all in pieces. This guy had bought 4 of these World War II trainers, took them all apart, put them in a barn. His mistake was he also bought a P-51. And he went out and crashed and killed himself in his P-51. His wife didn't want anything to do with airplanes, pilots, airports, flying, anything else. She wouldn't even talk to anybody until I came along. I knocked on her door and I said, "What do you want for those 4 airplanes?" She said, $2,400. I bought 4 airplanes, all in pieces, for $2,400. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, right? 17 years and $50,000 later, I was flying that PC. And a lot of you can identify with that because you're in the business of restoring airplanes. It ain't easy. And I totally respect the folks in this CAF that come here and volunteer to climb around and turn wrenches on these airplanes because it's a passion. It has to be. But you know, more than that, more than just fixing and flying airplanes, I really appreciate the heritage that CAF represents. And I am a big believer that if you don't know your history, you're not going to have much luck, of flying for the future, because that's where it's at. We stand on the shoulders of those World War II mechanics and pilots and cooks and folks that fix the bombs, and this is our heritage. And so I'm glad the CAF is keeping that alive. Thanks, Whips, and all you guys and gals that work for this. And if you don't know anything about CAF and you want to volunteer, it's a great gang to be with once in a while. So keep that in mind. So how do you overcome challenges like being in a prison camp for nearly 6 years? Well, you have to keep your parachute packed. Let me explain that to you. Several years after I came home from Vietnam, I was in a restaurant in Kansas City where I used to live. About 2 tables over, a guy kept looking at me, and I looked at this guy, but I didn't recognize him. He kept looking at me. He finally stood up, and he walked over to my table, and he pointed at me with a serious look on his face. He said, "You're Captain Plumb." I looked up, and I said, "Yes, sir. I'm Captain Plumb." "You're that guy. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam. You're a fighter pilot. Part of that Top Gun outfit in California. You were shot down off the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You parachuted in enemy hands, tortured, and were a prisoner of war for nearly 6 years." He was telling my life story. I looked up at this guy and I said, "How in the world did you know all that?" He finally broke into a smile and he said, "Because I packed your parachute." Tell you this, for this guy that runs around the country making speeches, suddenly I was speechless. The best I could do was stagger to my feet. He got a very grateful hand of thanks. He came up with just the proper words. The guy grabbed my hand, he pumped my arm, and he said, "I guess it worked." I said, "Yes, sir, indeed it did." And I must tell you, I've said a lot of prayers of thanks for your nimble things, but I had no idea I'd have the opportunity of expressing my gratitude in person. He said, "Were all the panels there?" I said, "I must be honest with you, of the 18 panels I was supposed to have in that parachute, had only 15 good ones. 3 of the panels were torn, but it wasn't your fault, it was mine. I ejected from that F-4 cannon at 600 knots, close to the ground. I was well outside the envelope of that parachute. You did your job, I didn't do mine." I said, "But let me ask you a question. You keep track of all the parachutes you pack? Do you know of all the lives you've saved?" The guy said, "No." He said, "No, it's enough gratification for me just to know that I've served. Just to know that I've helped somebody out along life's rocky road, that's enough." Here's a sailor, okay, in the bowels of an aircraft carrier, well below the waterline. His job is to stand at a long wooden table, and he weaves the shrouds and folds the silk panels of these parachutes, and he passes them along one after another, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, while the jet jockey While the Top Gun zooms around the sky at the speed of sound, couldn't care less about the guy down there in the hole. Until one day my parachute came along and he packed mine up for me. Well, I spent the next couple of hours talking to this guy and thanking him for what he did. And he was a very humble guy. He said, I'm not the only one that packed your parachute. He said, I did the physical job, but who packed your mental parachute? Who packed your psychological parachute? Who packed your spiritual parachute? Your mom taught you a lot about forgiveness. Your dad, World War II era guy, taught you a lot about discipline. And those two things, forgiveness and discipline, allowed you to survive. So I'm not the only one that packed your parachute. So if you will accept this metaphor, I think we all are parachute packers, giving of ourselves, asking nothing in return. The question becomes, how's your parachute packed? Who is it that you look to for strength in challenging times? And how's your parachute packing coming along? Well, mine was pretty well packed. My physical parachute, 15 of 18 panels. My mental parachute had the skills of my class. I was a fighter pilot, naval officer, engineer. My emotional parachute, pretty stable guy. My spiritual parachute, I knew the Lord. Got my parachute packed, same place you did, early in life. Lip soldier, I grew up in Kansas. I was just a hayseed from the Midwest. At age 17, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. Started looking for scholarships. Now, that little town that I grew up in had a lot of parachute packers in that little town. People gave of themselves, asking nothing in return. To give me some of the nuggets I was going to need when the going got tough. And of course, his mom and dad and big sister, two little brothers, coaches. In fact, if Clarence Smith was still alive, I would have called him this morning and thanked that guy for packing my parachute. This is ragtag basketball. We lost and lost and lost. I had a terrible season. Imagine one dejected 13-year-old lad after the last game, which we lost. I'm wandering off to the locker room, and here comes the coach. He was a veteran. He had shrapnel in his leg from his war, and he walked with a limp. But he caught up with me. And I felt his arm over my sweating shoulder. And I looked at the coach, tough, disciplinarian. All I could think of to say was, I'm sorry, coach, I guess this team's just a bunch of losers. The coach squeezed my shoulder. He sunk his fingernails into the flesh. He was about to say something he didn't want me to forget. He said, son, whether you think you're a loser or whether you think you're a winner, you're right. I didn't understand that. I asked him the next day, Coach, what did that mean? He said, just this. He said, life is a choice. Every day of your life is going to be another beautiful choice. Yeah, I don't care where you go, he said. I don't care what kind of a scrape you get yourself into someday. I don't know how he had that kind of premonition, unless it was why I played basketball. He said, you can choose every day. You can choose happiness and sadness, wherever you are. You can choose a smile or a frown. You can choose health or sickness. You can choose profit or loss. You can choose life or death. He said there's one more choice. When the going is tough and the margins are thin and the competition is high and you're all ideas and you want to quit, you can always choose to give away all those other choices. You can absolutely elect to step back and become the victim, or you can step forward and become the victor. It's your choice. He said, but I don't want you coming back here 4 or 5 years belly aching to me because you flunked out of high school and you couldn't stand those teachers. They were always picking on you. I don't want you coming back here in 8 or 10 years telling me you married this gal and she turned off bad, but you had to divorce her and she was the reason you failed. He said the real truth is the difference between success and failure is not the things around you. It's the choices you make about the things around you, and you can choose to be a winner, and you can choose to be a loser, and you can choose to give away the choice. Now, with that kind of inspiration and motivation, as you might suspect, I graduated that little grade school top of my class of 2. And the other guy wasn't all that bright. And at age 17, my Parents couldn't afford to send me to college. I started looking for scholarships. Got an appointment to Annapolis. Got on that Greyhound bus in Kansas City, Kansas, and 2 days later, I was pledging to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And many of you have made that pledge. How many vets we got in the room here? All right. Thanks for your service. Appreciate you guys. Wasn't easy. So there I was, married my high school sweetheart under the Arch of Thorns, but I was inspired at Annapolis. Of course, I learned to tie knots and send the Morse code and drive the ships around the Chesapeake Bay. But our superintendent, Admiral Charles Kirkpatrick, would stand up in front of the big pep rallies before the football game at the Naval Academy. He would clench his fist. You could see the veins running his brow, and he would say, "You guys can do anything you set your minds to do. You guys can do anything you set your mind." Was this hype? Messing with their minds? Mental manipulation? Did it work? Those 4 years, the Naval Academy took a ragtag football team and produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners for 4 years. Roger Staubach, Joe Bonino. We were the number one college team in the nation. Best of all, Navy beat Army 4 times straight. And today, the game's going to start here in about 30 minutes. We're going to beat Army again today. So there I was. Okay, graduate of the Naval Academy, married to my high school sweetheart, in flight training, Pensacola, Florida, Beeville, Texas, Meridian, Mississippi, where John McCain was my flight instructor. John taught me to fly jets. Got to know him pretty well. And I'd meet him again, of course, in a prison camp. Launched on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. Never forget that day. It was my wife's birthday, 5th of November, 1966, and I'm on the flight deck of a Kitty Hawk. I'm looking down at the Pier 3 in North Island in San Diego. And there's a crowd down there to send us off, and I picked out my wife, and I waved to her, and I promised her I'd be back in 8 months. Almost made it. Yep, so there was 5 days from the end of my tour. 74 successful combat missions, over 100 carrier landings with 5 days to go. Well, my co-pilot, my backseat, radar intercept officer, and I were on a target just south of Hanoi, the capital city. We were hit by a surface-to-air missile. It exploded with some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel, sent that bird topsy-turvy, end over end, down towards the right side below. I ejected, he ejected, our parachutes opened, and we came floating down over enemy territory. I looked up at the canopy, holding me in the sky. I looked down at the unknown. They're shooting at me. The audacity of this enemy. They just knocked down my multi-gazillion-dollar jet fighter. Now they're shooting at the pilot. And I'll tell you this. You can identify with this one. When you're dodging bullets, it's tough to come up with a long-range plan. So what would you do when you're blown out of the sky? And if you set this metaphor, you know, we all get blown out of the sky once in a while. Something as insignificant as being cut out of your lane on 101, something as major as the loss of a child. But isn't that where your value lies? In the tough times? I mean, anybody can answer the phone, right? Anybody can log on to the computer. Your value has to be measured when the heat's on, when things are tough. So there I was. Hanging in the parachute. Just the canopy, look down at the unknown. They shoot. I mean, I've got rifle fire snapping past my ears. What would you do? Well, I took a deep breath. As that gunning sergeant on the rifle range taught me, I had to calm myself. I let about half of that breath out. And I bowed my head and I said a prayer. I asked for a little extra strength that day from above. I'll never forget that prayer. I thought about that prayer a lot over those next nearly 6 years in that prison camp. I thought back to that moment in time, and I'm hanging in the parachute. I would say to myself, well, dummy, why didn't you make a deal with God? Promise to be a righteous, sober, godly guy the rest of my life. Lord, all I need from you is a little wind. 10, 12 knots, gusting to 40. Blow me back to sea. I guess I didn't feel much of a negotiable position, so I just prayed for the guts it was going to take to survive. I'm going to pray for my wife. See, this was my war, not hers, and yet it's even the Vietnam War. She would feel more pain from that war than I did. I hit the ground, think about waist deep in a rice paddy, deserted upon by it seemed like 1,000 of the enemy. They stripped me of everything I had. They took my flight gear, my clothing, my personal possessions. They even took my name. They gave me a name from their language just to humiliate me for the next nearly 6 years. Dragged me around village to village, camp to camp, tortured for 2 days, and tossed into this little cell. The one I described to you from the very beginning wasn't kidding you an inch. So let me tell you about my physical state those first few months in that prison camp. I was bleeding from 4 open wounds, no medical care, just 4 holes on my body where blood's coming out. I'm developing these boils. We never really understood where they came from, but every American shot down in the summertime got these big carbuncle boils, just ugly things. And so I'm surviving on 2 bowls of rice a day and a little bit of broth, and I'm about 120 pounds, I figure. I'm rotting away in this communist prison camp, and that's my physical state, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was the good news. The bad news was my mental state. I'd given up. I had surrendered. Fighter pilots are not supposed to surrender. That's not in the Top Gun playbook. And if you guys or gals who've been in the military know the code of conduct. If you're captured, you're only obliged to give name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Those 4 things. When I flew the skies of Vietnam thinking I'm tough enough, I will never give more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And the torture was too great. The pain was severe. I gave in. And I felt very guilty for giving in. I thought, what will the fighter pilots, my buddies, think of me failing in my mission so miserably? Or my family? I mean, how can I ever go home, knowing that I've been so weak? Maybe I won't go home. I thought, maybe if this war ever ends, I'll go to some foreign country and change my name, because I don't want anybody to ever know how miserably I have failed in my mission. So, it was with that guilt and remorse and mental pain. I'm wandering to my cell, and I heard in the far corner the chirping noise of a cricket. I went over to investigate this cricket sound. I found there, in the corner of my prison cell, no cricket, but a little piece of wire. It was about that long, poked through a hole at the base of the cell wall and scratching on my concrete floor, making this chirping noise like a cricket. Are you with me? Can you imagine what might be going through your mind in a situation like this? And especially with my feeling of guilt that I'd failed. I'm thinking to myself, it can't be the enemy. They're not sophisticated enough to try to trick me like this. If it's not the enemy on the other end of that wire, it must be another American. If it's an American, it's got to be a fighter pilot. This is an air war over North Vietnam. Pilots are being shot down, put in a prison camp. I knew that there was a whole prison camp full of fighter pilots. And boy, would I like to talk to another fighter pilot. Can we tell some stories? But I'll bet that guy's tougher than I am. He's probably older. He's probably more mature. He's probably a better pilot. And he probably didn't spill his guts when they tortured him. Guys. So I'm losing interest now. It'd be nice to talk to somebody else. Ever have those feelings? Be nice to talk to the neighbor about that problem we got. Nice to talk to the spouse about that unspeakable. Life's pretty short. Got other things to do. Anyway, if I can just roll over here in the prison camp and wait, surely in a few years the Marines will break down the gates and I'll be set free. I'll never have to take another risk the rest of my life. And the wire kept scratching, and I kept sweating. And finally, I walked over to the corner of my prison cell and reached down and grabbed that wire and I tugged. The wire tugged back. I tugged again and the wire disappeared right back to that rat hole. The wire came back about an hour later. This time the wire had a note wrapped around the end of it. The note was written on a dirty piece of toilet paper. I unfolded this very carefully. And on a piece of toilet paper, I could barely read it, but it said, memorize this code, then eat this note. I did it. I memorized the code. I ate the note. The code is a 5x5 box of the alphabet. 5 rows and 5 lines. A, B, C, D, E across the top, F, G, H, I, J. We left out K just to make it come out 5x5. Numbers down the side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and across the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, indicating any letter of the alphabet could be represented by 2 numbers. Number of the line, then the number of the row. Got it? A, first line, first row. 1 tug, 1 more tug. Z, fifth line. You think your email is cumbersome. You could try this. But it worked. This silly, archaic, cumbersome code became our language. More than that, it became our life's blood. It's absolutely vital. I mean, life and death is vital that we communicate with the other guys in that prison camp. Of course, the enemy would not allow us to communicate with the other guys. In fact, if you were caught communicating, you were going to be tortured again. And so we developed all kinds of ways to communicate. And this is the first one. On the other end of that wire, Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker, fighter pilot extraordinary. The guy had he had orders to NASA to be an astronaut when he was shot down. And then he was there for over 8 years. Bob was there 2 years before I showed up. And he'd been spending a good long number of hours, weeks, months, piecing together little bits of wire, stuffing them out the hole in his cell across a storeroom. There was a storeroom between our 2 prison cells. And he fixed that wire over the boxes and around their shovels and through the rope and into the little hole in my cell wall, 14 feet away. Unbelievable. Just to contact another American. Just to pack my parachute. His first word, how you doing, buddy? My first word, I'm doing terrible, buddy. I said, my president sent me over here. It's his dirty Vietnam War. It's all political. We know that. It's not fair what's going on in my life. It's not my fault. I'm the victim of circumstances beyond my control. And the enemy's torturing prisoners. They signed the Geneva Convention. They're not abiding by it. It's not fair what's going on in my life. It's not my fault. I'm the victim of circumstances beyond my control. And it was not my private airplane that flew in here. That was a U.S. government airplane. Said so right on the tail. Congress bought it. I didn't. They should be here. I should not. This whole thing is not fair what's going on in my life. Ever feel that way? It's not my fault. Yes, we all do. I'm just a victim of circumstances beyond my... Shoemaker said, you want to know your biggest problem? I said, you mean I have problems bigger than the ones I can see? He said, sounds like you're suffering from a fairly common prison disease. A lot of pilots get this disease when they get shot down. Some of them die from the disease. Oh, man, what's the name of this disease? I said, well, around here, we just call it prison thinking. I said, prison thinking? He said, Roger, you think you're a prisoner. I dropped the wire, stepped away from the corner of that prison cell. Another little self-analysis, okay? I'm still bleeding from 4 open wounds. I still have no medical care. Those boils I'm telling you about, I have so many boils on my face I can't see through the boils. I've got more boils on my body I can count. I'm now down to maybe 115 pounds. My sole possession in life is a rag. I have knotted around my waist to hide my nudity. Clearly, I'm rotting away in a communist prison camp, and now, to add insult to injury, they put me next to a positive thinker. I kept tugging. It's the only ball game in town. I said, okay, tell me about this prison thinking. He said, don't you see? When a fighter pilot is first blown out of the sky, or when any of us go through a little wrinkle in the plan of life, what's the first emotion? Oh, God, why me? This is so terrible. What could be worse than this? This event will never have any value. In fact, the best this time can ever be is a period of my life I can forget. but it's not my fault. I didn't start this war. The president did. I can't control the enemy. I didn't build that airplane. Clearly, I'm the victim here. Oh, he said, there's the problem. I said, what's that? You will find in this prison camp and in life, when you start blaming everybody else for your problems, you give away control of your life. That's what the coach was telling. Remember the coach that had the option to give away the option? Shoemaker says precisely how to do it. Oh, here's the catch, gang. Ready for this? Sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes it's somebody else's fault. But what do you get when you give away control of your life? So, Shoemaker taught me a lot. First thing he said is, you just joined the finest team you'll ever play on, bar none. In this prison camp, you'll see the finest American leadership you will ever see, bar none. Our leaders in this prison camp can't see us, can't talk to us. They can't give us a bonus. They can't fire us. They can't give us a promotion. The only way we can even communicate with them is tugging on wires and tapping on walls, and it's very cumbersome code. And yet, they're the best you'll ever see. They've given us a purpose in life. And the purpose is to return with honor. That's our motto, return with honor. Well, I didn't believe it at the time. I learned that, sure enough, the discipline that our leaders would put upon us would give us more freedom, even in that prison camp, than ever before. And statistically, you'll appreciate this. About 10 years ago, a study was done of all the Vietnam veterans. 30.6% have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Nearly a third of all the people who went to Vietnam have PTSD. Of the prisoners of war, 4%. 4% have PTSD. And it's primarily the guys who were shot down near the end of the war, who were not tortured, were only prisoners for a few weeks or a month. They're the ones that have the problem. Well, folks that are smarter than I am, psychologists and psychiatrists, think it's because of the leadership that we had in that prison camp and the team that we put together and the focus, the purpose that we had as prisoners of war. Jim Stockdale was our senior leader there, and he would tell us, there's no whining in the prison camp. You guys, we got a war to fight. Pull up your big boy pants. Let's get on with it. So it worked. And I don't think I'd be alive today if it hadn't been for Bob Shoemaker tugging on that wire, or the leadership that we had in that prison camp, or the team that we put together over there. But Stockdale and Shoemaker, and even John McCain, who was quite a leader in his own right, weren't really the best. The best parachute packer in the place turned out to be a Navy sailor, an enlisted guy. We were all pilots. We were all officers. We were college graduates. Who shows up? A Navy sailor. Seaman Douglas Headwell from Clark, South Dakota, was on the fantail of the cruiser Canberra in the middle of the night. He falls off. He used to tell us, I wasn't captured like you pilots. I was rescued. And indeed he was. Here he is, 19 years old, and he's on the fantail of the Canberra, and he gets blown over, and he shows up in a prison camp. We have these contests. Just for something to do, we would tug on our wires and tap on walls in this code that I told you about. We passed a little questionnaire just for something to do. A little poll. Who's the oldest in the prison camp? Who's got the most kids back home? Who's been here the longest? One time we had what we called the high-fast, low-slow contest to try to determine what fighter pilot had jumped out of his jet going highest and fastest, who jumped out going lowest and slowest. High-fast contest was won by some Air Force jock who punched out of his F-105 at 52,000 feet. Low-slow contest was won by the Navy sailor. 12 feet at 15 knots. Here's the interesting part, and why I take your time to tell you the story. This insignificant, entry-level, new hire, part-timer didn't seem to suffer from this 8-inch box. He didn't have a bad case in his prison thinking like the more mature of us college graduate officers did. What did he do? The sailor set to work. He got into action. He made something happen. He decided, as bad as this looks, there's got to be an opportunity here. He started memorizing all of our names. 254 guys in that prison camp, and he memorized. He put our names in the song. He would sing these songs with our names over and over. Wasn't nearly finished. He went back through the list and he memorized our social security numbers or identifiers. 254 long numbers he memorized. Still wasn't finished. Went back through the list and memorized our hometowns all across the U.S. Then he memorized our next of kin, wives and fathers. And finally, I'm not kidding you, Douglas Hegdell memorized the telephone numbers of each of the relatives of each of the prisoners. That took 2 years. About that time, things were looking better, primarily because our wives were back here petitioning our government and governments around the world, stop torturing my husband. They sold little silver bracelets. Some of you may have worn one of these bracelets with my name and the names of all the POWs on the bracelet. They sold these things for like $5 a piece and funded their trip to Paris to the peace talks to all these other nations and trying to get support for the POWs. Then it worked. It showed the enemy that we were valuable people. They better keep us alive. And so treatment started to improve. The torture stopped for the most part, and we got a little bit better food for the most part. And they decided to prove their lenient and humane treatment, they're going to send some guys home early before the end of the war. First guy they went to was John McCain. At that time, his dad was the admiral in charge of the Vietnam War. He was think pack. Well, John and I were prisoners. And so they went to John, McCain, we're going to send you home early. John McCain said, in your dreams, I would never embarrass my father like that. I would never give up on my buddies that need American medical aid. Send them home, and then it'll be my turn. He got in a lot of trouble by refusing to go home. So they're looking for somebody. And our senior men sent a message to the sailor. Son, I want you to go home first. The sailor sent back, sir, with all due respect, I would rather stay here with the team. I want to march home with you guys. Our senior man, Jim Peary, said, that's not an option. Here's a direct order. Shove off. Sailor said, aye, aye, sir. Home he came. Now write the script on the sailor, okay? There's a 21-year-old kid been in prison 2 years by accident. Starved, humiliated, lonely, tortured, hasn't seen a woman in 2 years. Suddenly, he has a brand new suit of clothes on, 2 years back pay in his pocket, and he's free on the streets of San Diego. What would you expect of this guy? Oh, did I tell you he was a parachute packer? What do you suppose he did? Sure, he started to travel. He went west coast to east. He went north and south. He went to each one of the hometowns he memorized. He dialed each one of those telephone numbers he memorized. He spoke to each one of the wives he memorized, told her that her husband was alive. We have these reunions. In fact, this is our 50th year. We had our 50th year reunion down at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda. And, you know, the admirals come in, the generals come in, and the politicians come in. The guy that gets the standing ovation is the Navy sailor, Doug Hegdell. Showed us all a little bit about parachute packing. So I thought about my wife a lot, and you can probably imagine. I planned the next 20 years around her, hoping for the day that I'd get home. Sure enough, the war ended. Here's how we found out about the end of the war. The camp commander, we called him the Rat. He was a rat. He opened the cell door wider than ever been opened before. And there were several of us in that little cell. And he said, today's the day you're going home. The war's over. We signed a treaty. Get on the bus. It's outside the gate. Our senior man, Jim Peary, stood up. And as we had been forced to do all those years, he made a very low, ceremonious bow to the camp commander. And then he squared his jaw and he said, sir, we're not going home until all the sick, injured, and enlisted men have left this camp. The camp commander was incredulous. He said, Peary, you don't understand my English. I'm offering you your freedom. Jim Peary, I'll never forget this, stood there, squared his jaw, and he said, sir, freedom is vital to us. but not without our integrity. Well, the rat didn't understand that. He hauled him out of there, put him in the stockade, beat him up pretty good. Came back to the rest of us, just a junior officer. Said, your senior guy has gone nuts, but the rest of you will not be penalized if you'll get on the bus. Well, we didn't know what to do. Hadn't been given any last-minute instructions. What do you do when you don't know what to do? Have a meeting. And that's what we did. This was the first thing we thought of was, nobody's going to believe this. Try to explain to your mom or your wife how you gave away a free ticket home. Or we just can't go. We just can't go. So I stood up and I faced the rat. And I did my bow. And I said, it's simple. Just prove to us that the sick, injured, and enlisted men have gone home, and then it'll be our turn, not before. You know, of the 7 years total that I was in theater, and as many bullets as I dodged, and as close to death as I came more than once, that was still the scariest moment of all. It's standing up to this guy that had my life in his hand. And was I happy when he turned and ran out of that cell, and I could hear him screaming all the way up to the head shed. But he came back about an hour later with a printout, a computerized sheet, signed at the bottom by an ambassador, an American ambassador. It was the manifest, the first planeload of guys. It was also our prayer list, the sick, injured, and enlisted among us. They'd gone. That was our turn. Still no rush from the bus. They put our senior guy back with us. He called us to attention outside that prison cell. And he called cadence up, 2, 3, 4 as we marched out of there. Proud Americans with their heads held high going home. I always wondered how we would react once we knew for sure we were going home. Would we cry? Would we cheer? Would we hug and kiss everybody around us? So we got on the bus, and over the dike, from the top of the dike, we could see the runway, the enemy's runway. And on the end of the runway, a C-141, a cargo jet, Air Force jet, ready to wing us away to freedom. What a sight that was. What a lump in my throat. But still no reaction. Nobody cried. Nobody cheered. Nobody had to kiss anybody else. You know, it wasn't until we climbed aboard that airplane. It wasn't until we rolled down the runway. It wasn't really until we finally lifted off enemy soil. We all broke loose and started hugging and kissing the Air Force nurses. 90 minutes later, I was putting these feet on free soil. Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. Ran down the ladder across that tarmac to the first telephone I could find to call. Tell her the good news. But she had gone. I called my parents back in Kansas. What has happened to my wife? They said, well, she hung on for 5 years, and just 3 months ago, she filed for divorce. She's engaged to another guy. Wow, what a gut punch that was. And I'm laying I went to the Great Lakes Naval Hospital in Chicago. I'm rehabilitating there. I'm curled up in the fetal position in that hospital bed, feeling sorry for myself, blaming everybody else I could think of, going into a pity part of my own. I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, Charlie. Did you learn nothing in that little 8-foot by 8-foot classroom? Did you learn nothing from your coach and the superintendent at the Naval Academy that you still have choices? So pull up your big boy pants. Let's get on with life. And I did. The other guys did too. And we're setting records. 591 of us came home. Only 591 men from all of the Vietnam War came out of those prison camps. They thought we'd be vegetables. They thought we'd be Looney Tunes. They had our families briefed to put us in institutions the rest of our lives. I mean, what can you expect after an experience like that? So far, from 591 men, we have produced 17 generals and 7 admirals in the military. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. 90% of the POWs in Vietnam stayed in the military, continue to fly airplanes, command ships and battalions all over the world. We have a bunch of congressmen, 2 United States senators. We have doctors and lawyers and preachers and teachers and bishops and judges and mayors. We have a vice presidential candidate and a presidential candidate. And they're telling us today we're healthier mentally and physically than if we hadn't been shot down. Figure that out. And the guys who were there the longest seem to have come back the healthiest. I don't know what that says to you. I have my own thoughts that it takes a certain amount of pain over a certain amount of time for any of us to learn anything. And that was the experience that I had there. Shoemaker, the guy on the end of the wire, two-star admiral today. I see Bob Shoemaker about every couple of months as I'm traveling around the country. Thank him again for fashioning that little wire and bringing me into the team. The kid that memorized the name, Douglas Hegbo, the sailor, fell off the ship. He's a teacher. Still packing those parachutes. My backseater, my co-pilot, came back to the States, went back to flying Navy jets off aircraft carriers. Some guys never learn. That's not fair. I continue to fly for the Navy, and as Lip told you, I have a PT-19 Fairchild, which is now in the museum up in Palm Springs. And I also have a Long Easy. It's an experimental airplane. It's a bubble canopy and chicken throttle, fully aerobatic. Closest thing I can afford to Super Hornet. I got to fly with the Blue Angels about a year ago for my 80th birthday, as a matter of fact. Can you imagine having the Blue Angels sing Happy Birthday? Yeah, see, I think I So I live a very happy life. I remarried, have a wonderful wife, 4 kids and 4 grandkids. So I'm living large. I ran a marathon a few years ago in Alaska. It's called the Midnight Sun Run. Okay, it's the Saturday closest to the longest day of the year. I chose that marathon because I figure I might need 24 hours of daylight to run 26 miles. But you train for about 18 weeks, and I went up there. Took 2 of my kids to Alaska with me. They didn't want anything to do with the race. They just wanted a free trip to Alaska. I took it. Night before the race, I'm with my kids, Joe and Evie. Hey guys, this is your dad's craziness, and it's an early go tomorrow morning. I don't even know where this race is. Don't worry, I'll find it. You guys take it easy, have a leisurely breakfast, and I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Wow, it was a hot day in Anchorage. And I'm trotting along there about halfway through, about mile 13, I hit the wall. Man, I'm sweating like crazy, just barely put one foot in front of the other, thinking to myself, the most beautiful sight in the world is going to be that finish sign. But it wasn't the finish sign, it was under the finish. Here's Joe, Evie, 2 of my kids. You're an naughty old man. And I finally caught my breath. I went to my kids and I said, you just don't know how much it means to your father to have you here, but how did you find the finish line? Well, Dad, we shared a cab with a couple of guys in the hotel. They knew where it was. I said, how did they know where it was? Well, Dad, they ran the race. They came back to the hotel. They had breakfast. They showered. And we came back to see you. Let's stop for some questions. I'm open to anything. So don't be bashful. Who wants to know any more about it? Go ahead. The favorite jet that I flew was whichever one I was in. I actually did fly it. Liv said that I'd flown the F-16. I got a flight with the F-16. I had this deal with the Air Force when they have a big party or a seminar. They call me up and say, we want you to come speak at our dinner. And I'll say, well, have you heard about my honorarium, my fee? I said, well, we don't have any money. I said, don't need any money. You know, just 15,000, 20,000 pounds of jet fuel, and I'll be there. And so I was really impressed with F-16. Probably my favorite, my F-4 brought me back a lot of times. What the beauty of the F-4 Phantom is, it's got duplicate everything. Okay, it's got 2 engines, it's got 2 electrical systems, 2 pneumatic systems, everything in the F-4 is double. And so I came back several times from those missions, pretty blown up, and it was still bringing me home. So I trusted that airplane a lot. The F-18, of course, is the F-4 is still one of the fastest airplanes ever built. And they retired that thing long ago. It's faster than F-18. So, but it's just, 2 big engines on a brick. And so yeah, probably the F-4 is my favorite airplane. Another question? Yes? Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. The F-4 was a wild weasel. In fact, they flew F-4s right here at Point Lagoon as targets. Some of the last F-4s were here. The first Gulf War. Yep. Wild Weasel was the first Gulf. Another question? Yes. I can repeat the question. Rick.
Did you ever go back to Vietnam and visit and see the sites where you were at?
I did. As a matter of fact, about 10 years ago, the head of the history department at University of Hanoi invited me to come back. And I said, no, thank you. I didn't meet any friends I want to go see in Vietnam. And so he kept pestering me. And then about 6 years ago, he said, I'll pay for a vacation for you and your family to come to Vietnam. I said, that sounds pretty good to me. He said, I want you to meet the Rat. Remember the Rat? The camp commander. This is the guy in charge of all of our torture. He said, the Rat's in his late 80s, and he wants to see a prisoner of war. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he wants to apologize, for something. He said, we also want you to meet some of the fighter pilots who you had dogfights with. And so, yes, I went back to Vietnam. Took my wife, 3 of our 4 kids, and had a vacation there. And I did, in fact, meet the Rat. And it was really interesting because he didn't want to apologize. He lived in a little shack on a creek, and I walked into the little outside of his shack, the little patio there, and he had like 15 bird cages, got live birds in these cages, And I'm thinking he retired from torturing Americans, now he's torturing birds. So, you know what? The guy approached me, and he wanted to hug me. I thought that was really interesting. And then he stepped back and he said, I want to tell you that I was your warden from 1968 to 1972. He said, and my finest achievement was keeping you happy and healthy while you were here. And I said, Bubba, don't you? It's me. I talked to that guy for 45 minutes, and he never, ever admitted hurting an American. It was crazy. To this day, I don't know if he didn't remember it or if he was afraid if he admitted to torture that he'd be tried for a war crime. But it was something else. I met the fighter pilot. I met 3 fighter pilots that I had a dogfight with. These guys were they were in MiG 17, and we laid out an aviation chart and tried to talk. I was going this way and you were going that way, and we never really figured out who got the best of whom. That wasn't the way the day I was shot down. I survived that experience, but it was interesting talking to these other fighter pilots because they were just serving their country the way I did mine. And one of these guys had 7 kills. He had shot down 7 American airplanes, and he had a total of 250 hours in airplanes. It was amazing. I mean, in the Air Force, you don't even get your solo until 250 hours.
Pilot training, 250 in pilot training.
So it was really interesting to talk to these guys, and obviously, thanks to my mom, I'd forgiven the Rat and all these other guys early on. Decided that forgiveness really is a survival principle. That if you can't forgive people that you're mad at, you hurt yourself more than the people you're mad at. And so I didn't have any axe to grind with these guys. That was a very interesting trip. How many people have been to Vietnam? Okay. So yeah, they're very friendly people over there now. Of course, a generation or 2 away from the Vietnam War. How about another question? Yes, go ahead.
On? Yeah, it was on. Hey, I couldn't really hear back here. When did you get back into the States for the final time?
I came back in 1973. I was repatriated. A treaty was signed. You remember that B-52 bombers actually went in December of 72. And a peace treaty was signed shortly after that. And I came back to the States in February of 1973. That was a happy day. Yes, Evelyn. This is Evelyn, everybody. I remember that because that's my daughter's name, too. Oh, good question. Evelyn says, how many airplanes total have I flown in all? Well, I've done about 5,000 hours in everything from helicopters to supersonic jets. Probably 15 airplanes in all. The F-4 Phantom, there's a model of that one right there. That green airplane that's hanging up there is the one that I flew in and shot down in. So take a look at that. And several other airplanes. See this red airplane right here? This is one of the airplanes that was shooting at me. And I had three of these guys cornered at my 6 o'clock position one time. And, it was kind of an interesting flight. Never forget that, 24th of May of 1967. And we were on a big target. I got shot up, and I had one engine on fire and hole in my fuselage not that big, and it hit the fuel tank, and one of my Sparrow missiles was on fire too. And so I was on my skipper's wing, and he said, "You go back to the ship. You know, you're no good to us anymore." So I head back to the ship, and I ran into three of those guys. They weren't red. And they were coming up me, about my 2 o'clock position. And I'm kind of a wounded duck here with a single engine and losing fuel. And I hassled with these three guys. I remember, this is impossible, but I remember distinctly that I was so low, I was looking up at telephone poles. So I got away from these guys. They were shooting these atoll missiles. These are heat seekers, a missile that homes in on your heat source. And I only had one good engine, but it was putting out a lot of heat. I was an afterburner most of the time. And I would look back, and they would shoot one of these heat-seeking missiles at me, which is homed in on my good engine. So I just said, well, I just shut my engine down, and I did. And I pull my engine back and shut it down. Now, and sure enough, the missile lost the heat source. It just tumbled out of the sky. Now I got my next problem. An F-4 Phantom without engines goes down like a brick. So I got to start the engines again. And sure enough, I could start my good engine and come up the other side. I did that 6 times. Each of these three guys had 2 missiles that they shot at me, and I escaped them. So I'm finally going back to the ship, but I'm losing fuel in a hurry. And I got gas pouring out of several holes in my airplane, and I'm not going to make it back to the ship. And I'm above an undercast. Okay, I got clouds beneath me. I can't see the water at all, and I'm flying along at 25, 30,000 feet. And so my backseater saved my life again. He called the ship and said, "Send a tanker." And they sent a tanker off the aircraft carrier, and they climbed up, and I'm above the clouds. The tanker's below the clouds, and my backseater, the radar intercept officer, he vectors the tanker up and turns to the right, and he vectors me, turn to the left, and I put out my probe to take on gas, and magically the tanker with this drove, this basket, just appears right up there. I looked down at my fuel state. I had 300 pounds of jet fuel. Well, the low-level flight at an F-4 comes in at 2,100 pounds, so I'm really sucking fumes. But I plugged into this tanker, had enough gas to come back to the aircraft carrier. So of course, I had to make a no-flap, single-engine approach to the aircraft carrier, but that worked out. I landed, was very happy to be back aboard the ship. But the crew of the ship was not happy to see me at all. They came out yelling at me and throwing rags and mops and all this stuff because I was leaking all this fuel all over the deck of the aircraft carrier. I was about to burn up my home. And so they sprayed it down and hauled me off there. I think they wanted to push me over the side. Yes. What went through my mind the first time I had to land on a ship? Well, we were very well trained. Navy flight training is about 6 months longer than Air Force, just to teach us to land on an aircraft carrier. And so you go out at these outlying fields just outside of Pensacola, and early in the morning when there's very little wind. And they painted the deck of an aircraft carrier on the field, on the land. And so you just bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce, touch and goes, more touch and goes. I probably did more FMLPs, field, whatever, FMLP is a practice landing on an aircraft carrier, than on the land. I probably did 500 times I did that before I ever got to the ship. And so my first landing on an aircraft carrier, and this particular airplane was the T-2J Buckeye, and you did it with the canopy open. And so I'm turned final, and I'm watching, and of course you got help. On the aircraft carrier is what we call the Fresnel lens, and it was a meatball. You're looking at a meatball, which shows you if you're high or you're low, and you look at the center line, you're off one side or the other. And it's actually, once you get used to it, it's fairly simple. And so I'm rolling in and looking pretty good, and I had a wasp come up and fly under my glove. While I had my first carrier landing, I had a passenger, and I'm just praying that wasp is just going to be calm. And sure enough, landed with the wasp called out and he flew away. But yeah, carrier landings are pretty exciting, and you know, once you do it several times, it becomes like parking your car in the garage. Although when the deck is pitching and rolling in heavy seas, you know, you got another problem. So, but yeah, it's exciting. Hey, great being with you all. I'm going to be around for a while. If anybody has any, you know, stories of who do you know and where you've been, happy to talk to anybody about anything. Again, great to be with the CF. Take a look at the museum and these airplanes. Man, these guys and gals do a great job of keeping the heritage alive. So thanks for coming. God bless. Okay.
So, for those of us who are going to come or go home and maintain control of your choices and make sure we know who's packing our parachutes, how about another round of applause for Captain Plumb?